This is the Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, Sony's newest top-of-the-line flagship camera. It's received some mixed response for not being a huge overhaul from its predecessor, but the truth is it's still probably the best hybrid photo-video mirrorless camera on the market. So much so that I've purchased one to be my go-to camera for the foreseeable future. But there's a few things that didn't really make the headlines that I bet you didn't know about that might be worth considering before you do the same. Today, I'm gonna be talking about 10 of my favorite lesser known things and throw in some bonus setup tricks while we're at it. So let's get into it. Okay, so some of the lesser known things about the A1 Mark II that I absolutely love, starting with Luts. We now finally have the ability to import Luts directly into the camera for video monitoring. This is obviously something we've been able to do on professional monitors and even phones for some time now, but we now have the ability to do so directly within the camera. To do so, simply take your favorite cube file and load it onto your SD card. There's now a new folder for Sony Pro LUT, so just drag it into there. Now on the camera, go to Exposure, Color Tone, Manage User LUTs. You can now upload that onto your camera for future use. I've also been working on some LUTs for an upcoming pack that I'll be releasing soon, so if you're interested, let me know in the comments so I can bump those up the priority list. And while you're down in the comments, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, next one up is the one that I think I will likely use the most and probably the one that's gotten the most headlines. Sony has improved image stabilization quite a bit from the original. It now has 8.5 stops of image stabilization. In practical terms, this has actually been pretty awesome, allowing for much slower shutter speeds handheld and making telephoto shots a lot more usable and easier. It also improves hand-holding video footage quite a bit. But the thing that's less talked about is the inclusion of dynamic active steady shot that we got on the ZV-E1. That steady shot was kind of buried deep in the menus, but this one's now just available in the main steady shot menu system right above active shot. Now I'll say that it does crop in quite a bit when you're using this function, and a gimbal is still better, but getting near gimbal level quality in a pinch is awesome and a very welcome addition to already some fantastic image stabilization. The dynamic active stabilization has a little bit of quirks to it. Like if you're walking a little bit too fast without a ninja walk, it can get a little bit jiggly, but not jiggly in the same way, like wobbly. It's a little weird. I don't know, you have to try it. But this shot was taken handheld, walking with just a modest crab walk, and I think it looks pretty usable, which is awesome. Hello, sorry for the abrupt cut here. I recorded this video at home and then went to the Bay Area for the holidays, and I realized that the audio cut out on the original video. So we're just gonna continue on here in this hotel room. So another thing that I'm really liking about this camera is the custom autofocus zones. There's obviously a lot of talk about the improved autofocus, which is brought to you by the AI autofocus chip, and for good reason, because it's awesome. But sticking on wide area autofocus still isn't the best, because we still want to be able to control where the camera is focusing within the frame. Instead, I like to create custom autofocus zones that I can still move around with my joystick. To set these up is pretty simple. Just go into your autofocus zone menu, which I keep in the function menu, and then scroll down to custom 1, 2, or 3. If you press the trash icon, you can now customize each zone. I like to have a small box, a wide box, and a tall box. That way I can utilize each of those depending on what I want to avoid focusing on within the frame. Okay, so here's my first little setup hack that will work on most Sony cameras, A1 or not. I often switch around a lot between focus zones. So like when I'm doing landscapes, I'll often just be on like a small point because nothing's moving. I can just click exactly where I want to be focusing. However, sometimes something happens, you want to quickly switch to a wider zone. Well, here's how to do that. What I do is I customize the AEL button to use one of those focus zones that we just created. Or if you don't have the Alpha 1 Mark II, you can just do like the wide zone or like the box zone, for example. Let's go down to Operation Customize, Custom Dial Set, and then over to that AEL button. If you don't have an AEL button, like you have the A7CR or something, just use C1. Basically, you just want to choose a button that you can hit with your thumb while still having the shutter, your finger on the shutter. We then want to set this to Recall Custom Hold 2. For shoot mode, let's set that to Manual Exposure. The next few settings we can leave as is and just go over to the checkbox and unselect them all. What this means is it will leave everything as is as it's currently set on your camera. Under Focus Mode, set that to Continuous Autofocus. Under Focus Area, now let's select one of those new custom focus zones or just a zone if you don't have the A1 Mark II. And then everything else can remain the same. We just want to make sure we have AF set to on. Now then go ahead and hit register. Now check this out. If you hit AF on or the shutter button, it's just going to use whatever autofocus zone you had already selected. But if you then swap over to AEL, it's going to automatically switch over to that wider zone or that different zone for as long as you're holding down that button. While we're on the topic of focusing, let's talk about focus map for video. While we obviously have focus peaking or manual focus assist, sometimes you do want something different to help you manually focus, and that's where the focus map comes in. This creates a colored overlay that highlights in different colors where the different areas of focus are. To enable this, go into the autofocus manual focus menu, and then under item 4, go to focus assist, and you'll have that new focus map. With this enabled, the thing that's in focus is not gonna have a color on it, but then anything that is beyond that depth of focus field is gonna be blue, and then everything between the depth of focus field and the camera is gonna be red. One thing to note on this, however, you do need to have lenses that communicate with the camera body. That means that they have to have the little contacts on the lens mount. So these ones, for example, don't have the contacts, so this focus map isn't gonna work, whereas this manual focus lens does, and that will then work. So most of those cool cine lenses or like retro vintage lenses won't work with this function, unfortunately, which in my opinion is definitely a bummer. I think there's some adapters that can make it work, but they're pretty expensive. I don't think it's particularly worth it just for that function. Let's say we use one of those new focus modes or stabilization. You got a shot that you really like and you want to mark a spot in the video that you want to use for an edit later. Well, you can now do shot marks in video on the A1 Mark II. All you have to do when you're in the playback menu is tap on this S1 marker on the screen. That will add a shot mark at that point in the video that you can then see later. The only downside with this is currently that has to be viewed in the Catalyst software. Now, I personally don't use Catalyst in a lot of my workflow, but maybe you do, and that would be really helpful for you. I was hoping that this would come to the Catalyst plugins that are available for Resolve and Premiere. Unfortunately, I don't see them in there currently. Hopefully that would come later. And I'm gonna do an entire video on those Catalyst plugins because they're pretty sick and I don't think a lot of people are using them. So make sure to subscribe to see that one. But perhaps something that is more universally usable is noise reduction. So the A1 Mark II now has a new composite shooting mode that allows you to take multiple photos and then combine them together to reduce noise in high ISO scenarios. This is very similar to that pixel shift technology that they've had for a while. So it's in the same spot in the menu system. So go down to the shooting menu, go down to composite raw shooting, and then go to NR shooting settings and select on along with the number of shots that you want to take. So you can take 4, 8, 16, or 32 shots to then combine together in post. My one qualm with this is it's only compatible with electronic shutter, and the lowest shutter speed you can do is 1/30th of a second. I would personally like to do this for more night photography where sometimes you want a lower shutter speed than that. But I guess in theory, you probably are gonna be using this when you don't have a tripod and you're in a bit of a pinch. So maybe 1/30th of the shutter actually kind of does make sense. Up to you, you can figure it out. Okay, so I am saving the best of these new features for last, but perhaps my second favorite is that we now have a dual battery charger included with the purchase of the A1 Mark II. I've been using a really crummy Amazon triple battery charger thing that it's slow, it sucks, it uses micro USB. I hate it, but it's the only way that I've been able to charge multiple batteries at a time. So I just set them there overnight and then they're eventually charged at some point. So I am really excited to have a dual battery charger on a flagship camera. It just makes a lot of sense because you're gonna have a lot of batteries for this thing. Unfortunately, it is not included with the loaner copy that I got, but I am still very hyped about getting it on my own. And another thing that doesn't come with the loaner that I am still very excited about is we now have 2 eyepieces. Very silly, yes, but if you've ever used a Sony camera, you know that sometimes those eyepieces pop off, and better yet, the secondary eyepiece is actually bigger, which I really, really like. Again, it didn't come on the loaner, but I did have a chance to try it out in New York, and I actually really liked how large it felt, and it really kind of helps you isolate out the different, the what's it called? The sun that can kind of get in your eye as you're shooting. So I personally will probably end up going with that one as like my normal eyepiece moving forward. All right, now let's talk about my absolutely favorite new feature about the A1 Mark II, and that is the little speed boost button. Like on the A9 Mark III, the A1 Mark II now has both pre-capture and speed boost. You're still limited to 30 frames per second on the fastest end, but let's say you're just in like low speed shooting mode, you're on 5 frames per second, you're just able to really quickly press that to boost up your frames per second and then shoot something if it's, you know, happening really fast without moving your hand off of the shutter or changing any dials or even pulling your camera away from your face. But that's not my favorite thing. My favorite thing about this button is that it is a custom button, meaning we can do anything we want with it. So it's not uncommon for us to have our camera set to manual and we're doing some shot somewhere and then we walk away and we haven't changed our settings. Let's say you've like shot something, you're at like a slow shutter speed or something like that. And then as you're walking, you see just like the perfect thing. There's like a person walking through and the light's hitting just right. It's this super split second fleeting moment and you just have to capture it. If you were to be in manual and you have to like change all your dials and settings to get that shot, you're totally gonna miss it. But what if we could set that C5 button to do something similarly to what we did with the AEL button? Let's go to custom operation and set that C5 button to shooting mode, recall custom hold 1 or recall custom hold 2 or 3. Whatever one you didn't set for that last thing that we did. Now within here, we're basically gonna set the camera up to what I call full oh shit mode. Let's set our shoot mode to aperture priority, set aperture to f1.4, and if you don't have a 1.4 lens, that's fine. It's just gonna take whatever the widest aperture of your lens is. Let's set the continuous shooting to 30 frames per second, exposure compensation to 0 or a little under if that's your thing. ISO, we're gonna set to auto, focus mode set to continuous, focus area we'll set to wide, and then AF on. Now we'll hit register. So now if you're ever in a situation that requires just a really quick spray and pray and you have your settings set to something else, all you have to do is hold down that C5 button, and for as long as you're doing that, it'll switch into this newly customized full auto 30 frames per second shooting, continuous AI autofocus goodness, and you will hopefully not miss that fleeting moment. Or if you don't have an A1 Mark II or you don't want to use that particular button for that particular thing, that's totally fine. You could program it to a different button like C1 or AEL. Totally up to you. It's your camera. You do what you want. But if you want more help making videos, making better content, gear that helps you do it, you should consider subscribing to this channel. I make new videos like this every week. So until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.